At midnight tomorrow, the largest stablecoin in the world gets locked out of Europe. Not paused, not warned, locked out of every licensed exchange across 30 countries. Tether's USDT, a coin worth well over $100 billion, will no longer be tradable on any regulated European platform. And when the biggest player in a market is forced out overnight, it leaves a gap, a very large one. Now here is the part almost no one is talking about. While everyone is watching XRP bounce off $1 this week, this regulatory shakeup in Europe is barely being connected to Ripple, but it should be. Because just 7 days ago, Ripple quietly secured the one license that lets it walk straight into that gap. So the real question this week is not just where is XRP's price going? The real question is this: when the world's biggest stablecoin gets pushed out of Europe, who fills that space? And does any of it actually matter for XRP? That is what we are going to break down today, calmly and honestly, including the part most XRP videos will skip, where the opportunity is real and where it is being oversold. Quick note before we go further, nothing in this video is financial advice. This is one read of the public record and the regulation. What you do with it is your decision, your timeline, and a conversation with a professional who knows your situation. This channel gives you the calm read. The rest is yours. Here is the plan. First, what actually happens on July 1st? And why the biggest stablecoin is being forced out. Then, the size and shape of the gap that leaves behind. Then, exactly where Ripple fits into this and why its timing was not an accident. Then the honest, two-sided read, the real opportunity, and the reality check. And finally, what to watch from here. Let's get into it. This is XRP verified. Start with the deadline itself, because this is the event everything else hangs on. For the last year and a half, Europe has been running a transition period under a law called MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation. Think of MiCA as Europe's full rule book for crypto. It decides who is allowed to operate and which assets are allowed to be listed. On July 1st, that transition period ends across all 30 countries in the European Economic Area, and there are no extensions. After that date, any crypto platform serving European users without a full license is breaking the law. And here is where the biggest name in stablecoins runs into a wall. Under MiCA, a stablecoin can only be listed on a licensed European exchange if its issuer has a specific authorization called an e-money license. Tether, the company behind USDT, never applied for it. Why not? Tether's position, stated publicly by its CEO, is that MiCA's rules, in particular a requirement to hold a large share of reserves in European banks, would introduce risks of their own. I am not here to tell you who is right in that debate. The point for us is simpler. Without that authorization, USDT cannot legally be offered by a regulated European exchange after July 1st. So the venues moved first, and, one by one, Europe's licensed exchanges have been pulling USDT from their platforms. Tomorrow, that process becomes complete and permanent. Now let's talk about how big this gap really is, because this is the part that makes it a story. This is the largest forced reshuffle the stablecoin market has ever faced. And it is not just USDT. Of the more than 1,000 crypto firms that used to operate in Europe under older national licenses, only a couple hundred have cleared MiCA's bar. Roughly 3 out of every 4 are losing the right to serve European clients. So Europe's regulated crypto market is being rebuilt around a much smaller group of fully licensed, fully compliant players. And in stablecoins specifically, one name has been the early winner. Circle, the company behind USDC and the euro-backed EURC, did the opposite of Tether. It got licensed early, and it has been quietly absorbing the regulated market share that Tether is leaving behind. So let me be clear and fair right now, because this matters. The default winner of this shakeup, so far, is Circle, not Ripple. But here is where it gets interesting. A door this big does not stay a two-horse race for long. And the question becomes, who else has the license to walk through it? That is exactly where Ripple enters the picture. This is the part the headlines are not connecting, and the timing is the giveaway. Just 1 week ago, on June 23rd, Ripple secured a preliminary MiCA license in Luxembourg. In plain English, that gives Ripple the regulatory standing to offer crypto services across all 30 of those European countries, the exact same market USDT is being pushed out of. And Ripple has a stablecoin ready for that market. It is called RLUSD. It is a dollar-backed stablecoin, supported one-to-one by cash and U.S. Treasuries, and it is regulated in New York. Crucially, RLUSD lives on two networks at once, Ethereum and the XRP ledger. Now look at the sequence. On June 23rd, Ripple gets its European license. The very next day, June 24th, RLUSD goes live in Japan after approval from Japanese regulators. This is not a company reacting to the news. This is a company that spent months getting licensed in every major market right before a global reshuffle in exactly its product category. So step back and see the shape of it. The biggest stablecoin is being forced out of Europe. The market is being rebuilt around licensed players, and Ripple just made sure it is one of the very few with a key to the door. If you have been following Ripple's regulatory moves and you see what they are building toward, comment RLUSD below. I want to see how many of you are watching the rails and not just the price. Now here is where I have to be straight with you, because this is where a lot of XRP videos lose the plot. Let's do both sides honestly. The opportunity is real. As USDT exits the regulated European market, every bit of stablecoin volume that needs a compliant home is up for grabs. Ripple now has the license to compete for that volume, and RLUSD has already been expanding fast. New listings, new markets, and a growing share of its supply sitting on the XRP ledger. And that is where the XRP connection actually lives. Here's the simple version. Every single transaction on the XRP ledger uses a tiny amount of XRP, which is permanently destroyed, burned. So the more activity runs across that ledger, the more XRP gets used up over time. If RLUSD keeps growing on the XRP ledger, that is more real activity on the network XRP powers. That is the genuine, long-term thread. But now the reality check, because you deserve it. RLUSD is still small. We are talking about a stablecoin worth around $1.5 billion, going up against a USDT that is worth more than $100 billion worldwide. And in Europe, the frontrunner is not RLUSD. It is Circle's USDC, which got there first. So no, this is not RLUSD replacing Tether. And no, this is not a switch that suddenly sends the XRP price higher. This is Ripple earning a seat at a table that is being rebuilt, in a market that rewards exactly the kind of compliance Ripple has spent years building. The benefit to XRP is real, but it is indirect, and it is slow. That is the honest version. And the honest version is the one worth knowing. So what do you actually watch from here? 3 things. First, RLUSD's growth. Watch its market cap, and watch for RLUSD getting listed on those big licensed European exchanges. That is the clearest sign Ripple is actually capturing some of the space USDT left behind. Second, the XRP ledger itself. Watch whether more of RLUSD's supply and activity moves onto the ledger over time. That is the part that ties back to XRP utility. Third, the bigger pattern. This whole event is a live example of a simple idea. Regulation is starting to favor the compliant players. Ripple has bet its entire strategy on being one of them. Europe is the first major test of whether that bet pays off. Keep those 3 in view. They will tell you whether this opportunity is turning into something real or staying on paper. So let's bring it all together. Tomorrow, the biggest stablecoin in the world gets locked out of Europe, and the regulated market gets rebuilt around a small group of licensed players. Circle is the early winner, but Ripple, with a brand new European license and a stablecoin already running on the XRP ledger, just made sure it is in the game. For XRP, this is not a price switch. It is something quieter. A slow, structural story about a company positioning itself for a world where the rules reward the ones who followed them. The opportunity is real. It is also early and indirect. Both of those things are true at the same time. While everyone watches the candles, this is the kind of move that shapes where Ripple stands a year from now. And the people who understand the structure are watching Europe this week, not just the chart. If this is the kind of breakdown that helps you see the real story underneath the headlines, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. No hype, no panic, just the structure, every single video. And if you want the full picture of why XRP is moving the way it is right now, watch the video on screen next. This is XRP Verified. Stay patient, stay rational, and as always, we don't wait for the future, we plan for it.